In today's video, we'll go back in time and find ourselves in some medieval mayhem. Dungeons, magic, monsters, and a whole new world to explore. But there's a twist. I have to survive 100 days within the body of a pixie. I have very little health, I can't wear chest plates, but I can fly, I'm super fast, and I can perform magic. Join us as my friends and I try to survive 100 days in medieval Minecraft. I'm gonna be honest, being a pixie, not my first choice. You see, there were so many options and I just couldn't choose. So I selected a random one, and this is what I got stuck with. A small, weak creature that couldn't even put on all of his armor. Not only did I have to worry about my already low health, I also had to take into account the weather. And on night 1, I nearly froze to death. After that, it was time to explore. So I decided to give my wings a test drive, and it did have its perks. I found myself floating to the top of many structures, avoiding all the mob spawners within them. At the end of day 2, I found myself a cozy cottage in the middle of the woods. Nobody was home, and based on the laws of finders keepers, the house was now mine. It was time to get mining. Because I was shorter than the size of a single block, I was able to make a tunnel very quickly. It didn't take long before I struck silver, and then after that, I forged myself some new gear. When it came to crafting and smelting, it was a little strange being that small, but I knew I was going to get used to it eventually. My new gear equipped, it was time to continue mining, and shortly after, I discovered a beautiful lush cave. I scoped it out, making sure that there were no hostile mobs in the area. Then I put my levitation to use. It was the fastest way to get around, and I didn't want to find myself falling into that deep pit where mobs could possibly be waiting for me. After gathering more than enough resources to get me started, I returned to the surface. Now you may have noticed that I have water droplets above my hunger bar. Well, that's because you need to drink water in this mod, and it has to be pure water. You can't just drink anything from a river or an ocean, and the only way to collect pure water was by collecting rain or pumping it from the ground. The next day, we were back to exploring, and during one of my many flights, I came across what looked like a greenhouse. In the inside, there was wheat, carrots, beetroots, and I helped myself to some of their crops, whoever they were. I did, of course, replant the crops as a courtesy to these mystery farmers, and then I was on my way. At the entrance of a cave, I encountered a goblin trader, and I made many trades, including emeralds for ender pearls. After that, I trapped him in a box so I could save him for later. You know, if I wanted more trades. After I proceeded into the cave, I made a great discovery. I could actually level up my skills. With more constitution, I could increase my health. More strength, I could do more damage. Now this was absolutely game-changing, because now I could go from a weak pixie to a fearsome force to be reckoned with. I made it my top priority to gather as much XP as I could, whether that be through mining or through killing mobs. And some of these ores were pretty interesting, like moonstone. I decided to see if I could craft any weapons, and I could. I tried making this big sword, and then I came to the realization that it was going to be absolutely useless because I needed to power it somehow. Speaking of power, you could make some pretty strong weapons as well as some very durable armor. All you had to do was craft an alloy forge, a special type of furnace used for melting and mixing metals. Pretty similar to the smeltery from Tinker's Construct. After crafting a diamond pickaxe, I left the cave. And then I stumbled across an abandoned monument, some type of fountain. I circled around the monument and found a door, and behind the door was a storage room. And inside were lots of chests. I opened the chests and I found lots of starter loot, including gold, iron, golden apples, and even some enchanted books. As I was leaving, I spotted a floating village in the distance, so I decided to make my way there hoping to find even better gear. I scurried across the city looking for some good gear, but I didn't find any. Although I did find one chest, and inside were plate leggings. It was better than what I was currently wearing, so the Sky Village wasn't a complete waste of time. And not even 2 seconds later, I found a second village. And here was where I would make my base of operations because I was just carrying too much stuff. I gave myself a little tour of the village, and I was surprised to see that the structures, they were pretty interesting. They had butcher shops, they had a 2-story library. I mean, I know we have those in vanilla Minecraft, but these buildings were way nicer. Break time was over, and it was time to get building. I decided to set up my alloy forge because I was carrying a lot of ores, and I needed to make some use out of them. I was pretty surprised to see how quickly this thing just burned through coal. I grabbed a few pieces of ore, put them together, and I ended up making Durasteel, a type of metal from the Star Wars universe. At least that's what the achievement implied. The Durasteel armor was my favorite compared to any of the other mod packs I've played. I mean, just look at the helmet. I was a Mandalorian. And that doesn't really fit with the medieval theme, but you know what? It looks cool. The next morning, I came across a cemetery. I don't know if it belonged to the village, but I knew one thing: there was loot.
Am I really gonna defile this grave for money? Of course I am!
I dug up the graves and found out that some dummy left bones and flesh where my loot should have been. The cemetery even had a secret crypt underground. I looked around and I had too much stuff in my inventory, so I needed to come back later. At this point, I knew that storage was going to be somewhat of a problem, so I had to craft a backpack. Now, the only way to make a backpack was with some wool, and there were no sheep around, so I had to craft it with string. I didn't have any string on me, but I knew where to get some. It was time to go back to the cemetery. I went into the crypt and found out that I was no longer alone. After taking out a skeleton, I mined some cobwebs, and then I decided to continue exploring, seeing how I was already there. I went inside one of the mausoleums, and I found a spawner. Once that was broken, I peered into an urn, a type of vase where you store human ashes, and I actually found a wither skull. Now, I wasn't planning on spawning the wither, but, you know, they're rare, so I decided to hold on to it. It was time to craft the backpack, and that thing was expensive compared to other beginner items. But once I had it, it was so worth it. With my brand new backpack, I packed up all of my items. I left the village, and I set off hoping to find more interesting sights, like this campground. Inside the tent was a villager who was willing to donate his backpack to my cause. There was also that one jungle village I found. They had statues, and next to the statues were these iron blocks, just free for the taking. In the outskirts of the jungle town was this massive tower, and at the top were chests, although I didn't get to take a look inside because there were Vexes, and I was not going to take on Vexes, especially in my current state. I did come across a pillager base though, and that's when I discovered that I could actually be effective in combat so long as I hid in tiny little corners where they couldn't hit me. I'm pretty sure it was on my way back, I don't remember, but I came across this underground altar dedicated to some mushroom. He was sitting on a throne made out of gold blocks. I decided that I could get more use out of that gold than he could, seeing as how he was trapped behind bars, so I took them. After that, I finally met up with Noah and Xavier. I guided them back to the house, and then I showed them around. And then Robert decided to grace us with his presence. Now, of all the things Robert could have been, he chose to be a mage, one of the most destructive classes. I was a little worried seeing how we were in a wood house surrounded in a forest, but you know what? I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I didn't think he would do anything stupid until he did. After that, we made an official rule. No more magic inside the house. If Robert wanted to do that, he had to go outside. And then he started a forest fire. Claimed it was self-defense. As soon as the flames started to spread closer and closer towards the house, Robert was just nowhere to be seen. So I had to put the flames out all night long. Thankfully, the fire didn't get too close, so we were finally ready to get back to work. And just when you thought we were sick of fire, it was time for us to build a nether portal. Beneath the house where I started my mine, I decided to make a little nether portal room. And there I lit the portal and walked inside only to find that our spawn was actually pretty safe. It was even close to a nether fortress. How lucky's that? What was even luckier were the chests I found. Chests, each with 8 diamonds. In total, I came out with 16 diamonds after only, like 10 minutes of exploring? But there was one thing that I forgot. I forgot to consider the weather. I was about to burn to death. I was also about to die from dehydration. My water bar was completely empty, and by that point, my vision was already getting blurry. I had to head back before I died of heat stroke. I went to the cauldron and I drank myself a delicious glass of rainwater. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough to go around. After that, Noah and I decided to begin our first expedition as a group. We set out in search of dungeons and other wonderful things. Luckily for us, it didn't take long until we discovered some type of mushroom base. Inside, we were greeted by an army of mobs who weren't too happy to see that we were invading their home. Unfortunately, there was some friendly fire. I accidentally killed Noah. I don't know how, but I guess my sword does some type of ranged attack. Anyways, he died. All alone, I decided to face the mobs head on. I used one of the relics I found and it set them on fire. In other instances, it would even strike them with lightning. I began to lose health, so I hid under a table, explored this chest. All of a sudden, I was alerted by an explosion of magic. I checked it out, and it seemed as if Noah had come back. Until he died again. By sunrise, most of the mobs had already been killed. Noah decided to stay behind, but I moved on. And then I discovered another mushroom base. Now, I don't know why anyone would want to live in a mushroom, but to each their own. The residents of said mushroom were very close to killing me, but thanks to the table, I was able to live. And then I came up with one of my brightest ideas in this entire mod pack. Instead of having to go through the trouble of making a mob grinder, I could just farm them right there. There was a mob spawner on the next floor, and the mobs, they just kept spawning. This was going to be the perfect spot for me to gather all the XP I needed to level up my skills, as well as save a little for some enchantments. I killed so many mobs on that one day that I eventually had to repair my diamond sword. After all was said and done, I went to the local village, marked the waystone, and that was so that I could come back whenever I needed more XP. When I got back home, it looks like the guys made a little barricade on the front porch. After that, I decided to chop down some trees, seeing as how it was a little claustrophobic in the house, it just looked too overgrown. After that, I crafted some water pumps. You see, it was just taking too long to collect the rainwater, so why not just pump it from the ground? And now that we had an infinite water supply, trips to the nether, well, I was hoping they were going to be a breeze. I went back to that fiery hellscape, and I decided to collect some glowstone. The mod pack I just updated, and it was time for me to heal my inner child. Now, how exactly was I going to do that? Well, I was going to make myself an Aether portal. Like many young Minecrafters in 2012, 2013, I found myself extremely disappointed when I tried to make a Minecraft Aether portal on my Xbox. On the other side of the portal, I was greeted by a dense forest. And this forest, when I say dense, I mean it was dense. I was also awarded with a special weapon, as well as some XP. As for the floating islands of the Aether, well, because of this mod, these islands were way bigger. One of the perks of my class, being a pixie, was that I am immune to fall damage. I lost the portal, so I decided to take a shortcut. If you fall from the Aether, you go back into the overworld. I thought I was going to survive that fall, and for some reason, I didn't. After my tragic demise, it was time to get enchanting, and thanks to my little XP farm, that wasn't going to be a problem. Shortly after, I decided to go mining again, and that's when I came across our first dungeon. At first, I couldn't really tell what this was supposed to be, whether it was a dungeon or some type of crypt, and then as soon as I saw the coffins, I immediately knew that I had discovered catacombs. All of a sudden, these corrupted pillagers just came out of nowhere. Xavier decided to join me, and together we would go out and explore every single tunnel within this labyrinth. Along the way, I made sure to look into every single coffin, just to make sure that we weren't missing out on any loot. Most of the passages were just long hallways full of chests and other coffins. I was surprised to see that one room was actually dedicated to a big geode. And just when we thought things couldn't get any creepier, a wraith just appeared out of the ground. At the end of the tunnels was a massive room. I couldn't tell what it was, but I did recognize one thing. There were end crystals, and where there were end crystals, there had to have been some type of boss, right? But in all actuality, the room itself didn't really prove to be that much of a challenge. Thanks to my pixie speed, I was able to go and break the spawners before anything was ever manifested. With no mobs to get in my way, I was able to do a little exploring, and it turns out that the room was some type of laboratory. Then I opted to break the end crystals. In my mind, I thought that if I broke them all, maybe something would happen. Maybe a secret room would be unlocked or a mob would spawn, but nothing did happen. Xavier and I, we left the dungeon, and on our way home we came across what looked like a woodland mansion, a more upgraded version, and when we got a closer look, it looked like Robert beat us to it. The mansion was in ruins. There was ash all over the floor, there were tons of blocks missing, clearly there had been a fire, and there were no lava pools to start the fire, so it had to have been him. And it wasn't much of a far-fetched theory, because he was still there! Regardless of the damages, I decided to explore. It looked like there were some survivors, and they weren't too happy that their house burned down. Although for some reason, and usually they're more aggressive, these pillagers didn't really put up a fight. While the top section of the house looked like it was burned, the bottom half actually remained intact. It was made out of stone, and the staircase itself led to a basement. But this wasn't any normal basement. This was like a maze. And this maze was infested with skeleton creepers. When the skeleton creepers explode, they give you blindness. That way you can't see the next skeleton creeper coming. I made my getaway, and then I accidentally stumbled across another chamber. This one looked like a boss room. Turns out this area was home to the Adjudicator, a type of super vindicator, although he reminded me more of an evoker. Now, this ended up being one of the easiest boss battles I had ever played in Minecraft. Thanks to my pixie's levitating ability, he couldn't even land half his hits. Of course, I still wasn't immune to arrow attacks. I had to step away a little and regenerate. He summoned some buddies to help him out, but it still wasn't enough, and in the end, we ended up taking down the Adjudicator in less than 5 minutes. When I got home, Robert was there, waiting for me by the enchantment table. So in order to keep things from burning down, I decided to give him a peace offering. Some of my armor which I hadn't used, or stuff that I couldn't use. Robert accepted this peace offering, and after we put the armor on, there were no more fires. We finally had peace. With that out of the way, I could finally focus on my next goal. You see, I wanted to summon a boss known as the Lich, and the only way I could do that was if I found 3 staff pieces. Once I put the pieces together, I could spawn him, but the pieces, they were scattered throughout the Minecraft world in random dungeons. I spent hours looking for these dungeons, and every single time I found one, it was always the same piece. Frustrated, I went back home. We had a little issue with the mob spawning, so I decided to build a wall, but Robert made me aware that I was building on his property, so I had to take care of it. After that, he invited me on a little mini-mission. He had made a discovery and he wanted to share it with me. It was another catacomb, although this one was a little different. There was one room, and it had 4 spawners, all with corrupted pillagers. Now usually, this number of spawners and that many mobs, that would be enough to deter me. But thanks to my pixie powers, once again, I was able to prevail. But the fun didn't stop there. A few hours later, I came across an ancient city. Now, I'm gonna be honest, this was actually the first time I came across one of these ever, so I didn't know what to expect. I was aware of the Warden, and I was somewhat familiar with skulks and sensors, or whatever they're called, but I didn't think they were so loud. All of a sudden, I get blindness, I can hear heart beating, I don't know if it's mine or if it's some creature's, so I decide to fly away. I kept looking for chests until I set off another one of those shriekers, and then all of a sudden I was greeted by the Warden. I started spamming him with some arrows, but he let out this massive burst of energy or sound waves. I don't know what it was, but it did a lot of damage. Eventually, I decided that my flying was too slow, so I decided to take it on foot. That proved to be a really bad idea. I went back to the mob grinder to get some more XP. I wanted to upgrade some of my armor so that I could face him, but when I got back, I couldn't find him. After a bit of wandering, I found him crying in a corner. At least he sounded like he was crying, and I started shooting arrows again. It took a couple of minutes, but eventually the Warden fell victim to my bow. As a reward, I collected the Warden's Heart of the Deep and kept it as a trophy. I went home, and I was surprised to see that Robert actually left a gift for me. It looked like our little alliance was finally paying off. It was the remaining pieces of the staff I was building. We were almost ready to spawn the Lich. The only thing we had to do now was to get the necessary materials to perform the ritual. First, we needed to make a bone dagger, and then we needed to collect the blood of 8 villagers. And though I felt bad, it had to be done. So I went to the local village, and I began collecting as much as I could. Although the one thing I didn't expect from this village was resistance. Turns out that this mod pack actually implemented guards. They were there to protect the villagers, and in this case, I was the threat they needed to defend against. But it didn't matter how many guards they threw at me. I had a mission, and nothing was going to stop me from completing it. Villager after villager, I continued to fill the bottle. Any guards that got in my way were quickly eliminated. After finally filling the bottle, it was time to make my way to the Lich prison. All I had to do was find one. And after a long period of searching, I finally came across a floating island. And at the top of the island, the altar to summon the Lich. Seeing as how the Lich was a creature of darkness, I thought it would be most appropriate to wait for the sun to set. That way I could summon him at night. And as soon as the last bits of daylight faded away, I began to place the pieces of the staff on the altar. I then approached the altar and poured the contents of the bottle in the middle. The result was one of the coolest spawn animations I had ever seen. There he was, the Lich, in all of his unholy glory. I watched with anticipation as his health bar began to fill up. Before I could even shoot an arrow, the Lich made the first strike. With my pixie powers, I tried to evade his skulls, but that wasn't enough. He made it rain corpses from the sky. And if they happened to land on you, they would deal a ton of damage. And that was essentially the case. Those corpses, they crushed me. I died multiple times. In fact, I died so many times, I don't even remember how many times I died. I know I said died like 3 or 4 times, but it was awful. So I came up with a brilliant plan. I brought out the old lucky lava bucket. Now I know, it's a cheap way to kill the boss, but come on, give me a break. I'm a pixie. Lich versus lava, lava versus the lich, who was gonna come out on top? After a few minutes, it looked like the answer was clear. And just when I thought I had finally taken care of the thing, he had a second phase. But none of that mattered. I still had my lava, the lich was still there, he wasn't moving, so it was time to do it all over again. And after burning him for some time, I shot some arrows at him, and guess what? He had a third phase. But the third phase was the easiest phase of them all. The boss had somehow gotten himself stuck in the ground. He was suffocating. So I decided to do a little victory dance in front of him, and then I wanted to see if I could actually hit him. I got up close and... yeah. Now to you the battle may have lasted a couple of minutes, but in Minecraft time, that battle lasted multiple days. At the end of it all, I was awarded with the Lich's staff. I right-clicked the staff, and it summoned a creature, one of those ghouls. I now had a minion, but I wanted to put his powers to the test. So we went to a nearby pirate ship to test his skills on the crew, and he attacked just like a wolf. If I had been damaged, then he would go and attack my attacker. Well, there you have it. Medieval Minecraft. I love the mod pack, I hated the pixie class. Never again, I'll probably try again with something else. Thanks for watching.